The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow, transporting oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia now comes in an even more concentrated formula, with 450 milligrams of cocoflavanols, 5 times more than the leading dark chocolate bar and 15 times more than the leading cocoa powder.
CocoVia has a proprietary process that preserves cocoflavanols at the highest levels, and the product undergoes rigorous testing at every stage, which allows them to guarantee the highest level of cocoflavanols per serving and to provide the purest, highest quality product possible.
People's Pharmacy listeners can now try CocoVia for 25% off by using the code Peoples25 at cocavia.com. That's COCOAVIA.com. Obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease are linked to the food we eat. Is there anything we can do to improve our diets? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Americans eat a lot of processed food. We love chips, salsa, frozen pizza, microwave dinners, instant ramen, granola bars, and low-fat, highly sweetened fruit yogurt, just to name a few things. But such a diet is high in sodium and sugar. Worse, it's low in fiber and phytonutrients.
Dr. Mark Hyman has been advocating for a change in the national diet for decades. The benefits would be immeasurable.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy Food Fix, how to save our health, our economy, our communities, and our planet one bite at a time. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
We don't need to tell you that what you eat matters for your health. You already know that. Many of the most common health problems can be tied directly to our diet. Is there anything we can do, individually and collectively, to fix our broken food system?
To find out, we turn to Dr. Mark Hyman. He is the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center, the head of strategy and innovation of the Cleveland Clinic for Functional Medicine, and board president for clinical affairs for the Institute for Functional Medicine. His previous books include Eat Fat, Get Thin, and The Blood Sugar Solution. His most recent book is Food Fix: How to Save Our Health, Our Economy, Our Communities, and Our Planet one bite at a time.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. Dr. Mark Hyman.
Well, I am so glad to be back here because I like talking to the people.
Thank you.
Well, you're about to do that. Dr. Hyman, I'm going to ask you to play amateur anthropologist and imagine humans about 10, 15, 20,000 years ago. Our ancestors, but our very, 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 very ancient ancestors.
You could go a lot more ancient than that, Joe.
Yeah, but I think 30 or 40,000 years is
enough.
That's
okay.
enough.
That's before agriculture.
And, people were basically what? Hunters and gatherers. And they focused on food. I mean, that was the only way they could survive. That was their number one most important priority in life.
It's true, although it turns out they had a lot of free time.
That is also true. Anthropologists have discovered,
Yeah, they worked hard, but they didn't spend all their time trying to just get food. But when they got food, it was stuff that was around that was either easy to find or they had to kill, which was a little harder. When you look at their diet, it was amazing. There were 800 different species of plants that they ate. There was 100 grams of fiber. The vitamin and mineral content was far greater than that of food today. And, of course, they did hunt animals and ate what they can, from insects to lizards to bigger animals if they could catch them, which was a little harder. They would often eat the bone marrow first because that's where all the fat was. They would eat the organs first, that's where all the nutrients are. In fact, liver is far more nutrient-dense than any vegetable on the planet in terms of vitamins and minerals and iron. And so this was what they were eating. And they didn't suffer from the chronic diseases. They had other issues like being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or, tree falling on their head and having injuries or broken bones and infections perhaps. But they weren't suffering from the kind of diseases that plague us now, which is chronic illness.
Well, if we fast forward to our great-grandparents, maybe even our grandparents, people were eating very differently than they are today. What went wrong? Because today we suffer from a lot of ailments that may be traced directly back to our food, and we rely so much on processed food. You can't go into a gas station without being inundated with all kinds of snacks. They just surround us. If you go to an airport, and I suspect you do a fair amount of flying, the snack food is just overwhelming. So tell us what went wrong.
Although it's true, I've learned how to hunt and gather in airports and find the nuts, and it's increasingly a better food environment, believe it or not. But here's the deal. Your grandparents, or maybe your great-great-grandparents, all ate organic. They all pretty much ate local. And most of it was, in some ways, probably regenerative, which they added manure and compost and so forth to the soil. So we have radically changed our diet in the last 50 years. And since World War II, there's been a dramatic change in agriculture. And it was not because of bad intentions. It was good intentions. People were hungry. We needed to produce more starchy calories. We needed to increase yields and make more food for a growing global population that was hungry. And so we got very good at producing starchy calories, which turns out are disease-causing calories, lots of flour and sugar and starch and refined oils. And those turn out to be some of the worst foods on the planet to eat if you want to be healthy. It turns out that 60% of our calories now come from these ultra-processed foods that are the result of industrial agriculture, which has many consequences we'll talk about. But it actually is linked to increases in death. There's 11 million people that die every year around the world, and I think that's an underestimate from eating processed food. And in America, it's 60% of our diet, and for every 10% of your calories that come from that processed food, your risk of death goes up by 14%. So you do the math on that. It ain't pretty. And so now we're sort of in this sea of unintended consequences. I mean, when we had Crisco, we didn't realize that trans fats were bad, and we got rid of it. When we started replacing fat with sugar, we didn't think that was bad, but now we know it is. And so we're living in this legacy of an agricultural system and a food system that is producing the worst food on the planet, that it now needs to be reimagined so that we can actually deal with the global crises of chronic disease and obesity, the economic burden of it, the climate change that's caused by our food system, the social injustice, the academic performance challenges that kids have from eating junk food, even our national security, which is threatened by the fact that 70% of our military recruits are rejected because they're overweight or unfit to fight. So we really have to think about this holistically, and we have to understand that the system that got us where we are needs to be reimagined so we can create a system that's got better food for humans, better food for animals that are raised in regenerative ways, and that also helps reverse climate change and help the environment. So it's all connected.
It is all connected, and it's quite a daunting task in Food Fix, how to save our health, our economy, our communities, and our planet, one bite at a time. You've really put it all together, but it's a huge puzzle.
Yeah.
You've just suggested that there are ways that we could approach changing this situation in which running agriculture as a big business for the bottom line, with attention primarily to the bottom line and not to any other harms or benefits. We could change that. We don't have to do it that way. Can you walk us through the very first step for that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the beautiful thing about the crisis, the food crisis that's causing all these issues I mentioned, health issues, economic issues, social justice issues, environmental climate issues, the beautiful thing about that is they're all connected, and they're all caused by our current food system for the most part. But the food system, if we reimagine it, can actually be the cure, right? If we start at the farm and grow foods that promote health rather than harm health, if we grow them in ways that protect and repair the environment and climate rather than harm it, we will actually create a cascading effect of improving our population's health, improving soil health, improving water conservation, reducing the damage to bees. You read about this every day that our pollinator species are declined by 75%. That all changes. And then downstream, all the people eating the real food that comes from these regenerative farms are healthier and the farmers make more money, the healthcare costs go down, the costs of the unintended consequences on chronic disease and Medicare and Medicaid go down. All of it gets fixed. And so I think there's a number of different solutions that I lay out in my book, which are essentially policy solutions, citizen solutions, and business innovations. And it can happen across the spectrum, and it's happening now. The whole movement towards regenerative agriculture is really taking off because that's where it starts, at the seed, at the soil, at the farm. And General Mills committed 1 million acres to regenerative agriculture. Kellogg's just announced that they were going to remove glyphosate from its supply chain, which is great because in your Cheerios there was more glyphosate or Roundup, which is an herbicide, than there was vitamin A and vitamin D, which were fortified into the cereal. So companies are figuring it out. Nestle, Danone, Unilever, Mars, they created the Sustainable Food Policy Alliance. They left the Grocery Manufacturers of America. There's really a sea change from the food industry, the agriculture industry, business industry, that is actually trying to solve these problems. The government's a little slow. We have to get more changes in our reimbursement policies for food as medicine. We have to support more regenerative agriculture.
Let me interrupt you right there, because the government still supports crops that are used for ultra-processed foods. I mean, we're talking like high fructose corn syrup, soy oil. Why? Why can't we get the government to pay more attention to the science?
Well, it's starting. I think there's provisions in the new Farm Bill for supporting more regenerative, sustainable practices and pilots and so forth. So there are people in Congress like Shelley Pingree and Tim Ryan and Jim McGovern who are very focused on this. Guys like Cory Booker, they get it. And there is a movement to try to shift our Farm Bill towards more of these practices. It's going to take a little time. But I think that there's just some general lack of awareness and education about this among our policymakers. And part of that is because most of their education comes from food lobbyists. There's 187 lobbyists for every member of Congress. The number one lobby group by far is the food and agri industry in Congress. So they're not getting educated in the right ways by the right people. And I believe that's going to start to change. But the problem with the ag system is, we developed farm supports for farmers so that, they're able to survive and they can be resilient to bad weather, crop loss, so forth. But what happened was that our policies promoted the production, even overproduction of these commodity crops, because that's what we support through crop insurance and other agricultural supports. But that doesn't actually help the farmers do the right thing. So it's sort of like this legacy system that has led to a farming method that destroys the soil, destroys the climate, destroys the environment, and produces terrible commodity crops that get turned into processed food. And there is a movement towards regenerative ag. It's going to take a minute, but I think this is inevitable. I mean, the UN said that, if we want to stop climate change for 20 years, all we need to do is take $300 billion, which is essentially the military spend of the entire world for just 2 months, 60 days. We could turn 2 of the 5 million degraded hectares of land around the world into regenerative farms and actually draw down carbon, save the climate, produce better food that's better for people, and it's kind of a win-win. So this is happening. It's just slow. And I think there's an increasing awareness that even among big ag companies that this needs to happen, although they're fighting it a little bit.
You're listening to Dr. Mark Hyman. He is founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center. Also, the head of strategy and innovation of the Cleveland Clinic for Functional Medicine. His previous books include Food, What the Heck Should I Eat? And Eat Fat, Get Thin. His most recent book is Food Fix, How to Save Our Health, Our Economy, Our Communities, and Our Planet, one bite at a time.
After the break, we'll contrast the interests of consumers and farmers to the interests of the lobbyists.
What prompted GM to get the glyphosate out of Cheerios?
How do food policies affect the most vulnerable members of our society?
How are kids' eating habits changing?
We'll also consider how we can change our own behavior related to food.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. Kaya Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's Kaya Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia, the maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verisana.com.
Today we're talking about the standard American diet and what went wrong with it. Many Americans eat a lot of processed food, and it's affecting our health. What can we do to change this?
We're talking with Dr. Mark Hyman. He is founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center, the head of strategy and innovation of the Cleveland Clinic for Functional Medicine, and board president for clinical affairs of the Institute for Functional Medicine. His previous books include Food, What the Heck Should I Eat? Eat Fat, Get Thin, and The Blood Sugar Solution. His most recent book is Food Fix, How to Save Our Health, Our Economy, Our Communities, and Our Planet, one bite at a time.
Dr. Hyman, as you were talking about all of the lobbyists and all of the pressure on the farmers to produce certain kinds of foods that may not be that healthy for us, I was thinking about the pharmaceutical industry, and that's with a PH, not an F. The pharmaceutical industry also spends a lot of money on lobbying our government and our representatives to try and get them to be favorable to the pharmaceutical industry. So whether it's farm with an F or farm with a PH, we've got a lot of lobbyists out there. How do the consumers, how do the farmers who just have small family farms begin to combat that influence of the agribusiness?
Well, I think people have felt apathetic about the political process, and understandably, but the truth is the only reason that our representatives are in office is because of us. And Americans have abdicated our democracy to very wealthy donors instead of using their vote to make it matter. And 50% of the population here voted in the last election, which was a record number, which is sad in a democracy where most other democracies have 70 or over 80% of their citizens voting. It matters what we say. It matters what we do. There's a group called Food Policy Action or foodpolicyaction.org, which tracks your congressmen and senators' voting records on food and ag policy. And you can go on there and see what they're doing. You can reach out to them. There's all kinds of mechanisms on the site to share your opinion. And they even created a social media campaign that ousted 2 congressmen who were in the pocket of big food and big ag based on just those reported voting records. So we do have more power than we think. And of course, we can vote with our voice. We can vote with our vote. We can vote with our fork. We can vote with our wallet. All those matter. And so individual choices do matter. Why do you think Kellogg's, without any federal regulation, is getting glyphosate out of their cereal? Because they were outed. The Environmental Working Group did an analysis of Cheerios and found that it had more glyphosate than vitamin A and D. They publicized this. And guess what? They're getting it out. And that's because of us. It's not because they're being directed by some policy. So I think whether it's business innovations, whether it's more policy changes that need to happen, we do have leverage. We just don't realize it.
And it's a really good thing because Cheerios are very popular with children. So I'd like to ask you about the impact of our current food policies on some of the most vulnerable in our population, especially the kids. How is that affecting them?
Oh, it's terrible. You know, we don't recognize that this epidemic of psychiatric and behavioral disorders in kids and this epidemic of obesity is related to the food system. We know from studies that kids who eat ultra-processed diets, their brains are 10% smaller, their IQs are 7 points lower. There's behavioral issues that are linked to these kinds of diets, and actually in interventional randomized controlled trials within prisons or juvenile delinquent centers, they swap out junk food diets for whole food diets, and they see dramatic reductions in behavioral problems, 91%, 100% reduction in suicide, reductions in oppositional behavior, violence, and tension, all sorts of things. There's incredible evidence from the CDC's report on nutrition and educational disparities that kids with poor nutrition don't do well in school. They get worse grades. They have more behavior issues. They can't focus. They can't pay attention. So all this ADD stuff, where 1 in 10 kids is on ADD medication, can be in large part due to our processed junky diet. And I've seen this in my own practice, where I've had patient after patient with these issues around ADD or behavioral issues. And when you fix their diet, they get better. So I think there's a huge damage to our kids' intellectual and academic performance. We're 31st in the world in math and reading. Vietnam is 21st. We should be number one, and yet we're not. And I think we're seeing 40% of kids are overweight. We're seeing increasing obesity rates, type 2 diabetes in children, fatty liver. Kids are on transplant lists because they drink too much soda for a liver transplant. I mean, it's frightening out there. And I think, if we were having a foreign nation doing this to our kids, we'd go to war to protect our kids, and yet we don't in any way. I was having a conversation with somebody who was high up in policy in the White House, and I said, why can't we stop marketing to kids all this junk food? Because in other nations, it really works if we prevent the targeting of kids. And he said, well, it's the First Amendment, and we got lawyers. We tried to do it. We couldn't do it. It's like, free speech. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. So we really have some impediments in this country that make it difficult for us to protect our kids. But why should school lunches have, French fries and ketchup being vegetables? Why now under the administration currently, there's a rollback on the school lunch guidelines to actually make the nutrition quality worse. And I think this is criminal. A school should be a safe zone. It should only have foods that promote healthy intellectual and biological development and academic performance. And we just don't have that. And I've been in schools where there's brand names in a day, like it's McDonald's Monday and Taco Bell Tuesday and Wendy's Wednesday. I mean, I don't know why we even allow that. And I think it's really criminal in my view. If we can't protect our own children, our next generation, we're putting our whole country at risk.
So how do you change that? Because kids love junk food. I mean, let's be honest. Pizza? Yeah, bring it on.
I'm sure they love heroin and cocaine if we let them have that, too.
I was going to say, kids love the foods that they're exposed to.
Listen, what do kids in Japan eat? They eat seaweed and raw fish.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are other parts of the world where kids eat rye bread and smoked fish. Or
exactly
all kinds of other things. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, I always it made me so irate that we have kids menus in this country. We have kids foods, snackables, Lunchables, whatever, Go-Gurts. It's criminal. And I think when you look at a kid's menu at a restaurant, it's just garbage. It's French fries, it's deep fried fish, deep fried chicken nuggets, it's like whatever, hamburgers, hot dogs. I'm like, why do we feed our kids that? We wouldn't even feed that to our dogs.
So I ask again, how do you change that?
Well, actually, that's a great question, and I think a lot about it. And I think one of the things that I've been working on is something called the Food Fix Campaign, which is bringing together a coalition of people, stakeholders in this system, to create a grassroots awareness campaign and also a grassroots education campaign for policymakers, along with an advocacy group that is going to create a strategy to change policies that are harming ourselves, our children, and our planet. And I'm super excited about that because no one's ever put this all together, told the whole story, and brought together a broad coalition of stakeholders here at Cleveland Clinic. We're excited about it. I've been meeting with them about this. So I think we need a coordinated effort to fight back against the lobbyists and become lobbyists ourselves for the good guys. And that's what I'm working on.
Dr. Hyman, I'd like to stay with the pediatric population, as it were, but shift the age range just a little bit and talk about adolescents, because most of the adolescents that I have encountered recently and that I've heard about are extremely concerned about climate change, but not all of them realize how much the food system that we have, the food that they are eating, is connected to the problems of climate change. How can we change that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think of myself as fairly educated, but until I started really researching this book, I knew that factory farm animals were bad for the climate. Maybe it was 15% of greenhouse gases. I'm like, okay, that's significant. But it's all fossil fuels. And as I got into it, I realized that when you look at the food system end to end, from the farm all the way to the landfill, that food system is responsible for up to half of greenhouse gases from deforestation, soil erosion, factory farming of animals, transport, refrigeration, processing of food, food waste. You add it all up, and it's the number one cause of climate change. And that's good news because it's fixable. And if we retool our agricultural system, if we learn how to implement regenerative ag models within farms across the country and across the world, which is, by the way, starting to happen. There are private investors doing that. The government's looking at doing that. General Mills has done it. That we can literally stop climate change. Like I said, the UN said we could stop climate change for 20 years by scaling up regenerative agriculture alone. And then you look at food waste. I mean, the food waste where the country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the U.S. and China. And from the methane that gets off gas when you throw the food scraps in the landfill. And methane is 25 times more potent than greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So there's so many avenues through which we can actually fix this if people understood that this is the problem we're facing. And I think that's really exciting to me because when you start at the farm, literally even at the seed with regenerative ag, you're creating food that restores carbon back into the soil. And by the way, people don't realize this, but 30 to 40% of all the carbon in the atmosphere today, and there's about 1 trillion tons in the atmosphere, 30 to 40% is from the loss of organic matter in the soil, from soil erosion, from over-tilling, from the use of chemicals on the soil that kills the soil, kills the life in the soil. That life in the soil is like a giant carbon sink. And if we scaled this up, it literally could hold 3 times the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere right now. 3 trillion tons of carbon could be stored in the soil. So it's kind of like this magic carbon capture technology, which I joke is like billions of years old. It's free. It's available everywhere on the planet. It's called photosynthesis, And I think we haven't really come to really understand that until very recently. So I'm excited about this, and I see, like I said, businesses. I see nonprofits working on this. I see regenerative ag being part of the conversation in Washington. I see Washington forming a group under the Trump administration with the EPA, the USDA, and I think the FDA about how to deal with food waste. How do we deal with food waste as an initiative that's a bipartisan, nationwide effort to reduce the 40% of food that we throw out? So the beautiful thing about the food system and the issues around food is that it's something we all can do something about. People can have a compost pile. They can start a community garden and make it regenerative. They can really make choices in their diet that actually become a regenitarian, which is hard to do because there's not that many sources, but there are sources of regenerative meat and regenerative plants out there that you can actually buy at farmers markets and so forth. So there's a lot of ways to get involved as individuals. And of course, there's a lot of ways to get involved on a policy level as well. So I think it's pretty cool. I mean, there's so much happening in this space. It's really encouraging.
It really is very cool. Dr. Hyman, people learn best, I think, from stories. And you have a case study on food as medicine involving Janice. She was 66 years old, and she was pretty overweight. I wonder if you could describe what her life was like, especially her food choices, and then how that was changed, because you have a before and after picture that really knocked my socks off.
Well, yeah, I mean, here's the deal. In functional medicine, which is what I practice, the foundational principle is that food is medicine, it's information, it can heal you or it can harm you. And I don't think our medical establishment has really gotten clear about the potential impact, not just for prevention, but for treatment and reversal of chronic disease. And the story you tell about Janice is a woman who was 66, who grew up on junk food, was fairly educated, but it was more of a convenience. She got fatter and fatter and fatter, and she ended up with a body mass index of 43. Normal is less than 25. So her weight was like 243 pounds. It was a very big lady. She had type 2 diabetes, on insulin for 10 years. She had heart failure. She had kidneys were starting to fail. Her liver was starting to fail. She had high blood pressure and was on a pile of meds, and her copay was like $20,000 a year. And all we did was put her in a group model we call Functioning for Life, which helps you change your lifestyle through the support and behavior connection of a group. And I call it Love Medicine. And she was put on a very anti-inflammatory, low glycemic, good quality fat diet with no processed foods. And within 3 days, she was off her insulin. In 3 months, she reversed all her conditions and normalized her blood sugar, blood pressure, her heart, her liver, and kidneys. And within a year, she lost 116 pounds. And it was just using the power of food as medicine. So I think, when we're facing this chronic disease epidemic, which probably 80% of that is caused by food, this is an enormous lever to solve this epidemic, which affects 6 out of 10 people. And 4 out of 10 have 3 or more of these conditions. And within a few years, 83 million Americans are going to have 3 or more diseases that are chronic, and it's bankrupting our country. I mean, we're running out of money. Medicare is going to run out of, and the trust fund is going to run out of money in 5 years. Within 5 years, 1/2 of all of our federal mandatory spending will be for Medicare. It's like half of our budget, and it's projected to be more and more over the next couple of decades. So the beautiful thing about this is it's solvable by fixing the food system.
But part of its behavior, and it's like, it's just a few chips and a little dip. It's maybe just a little bowl of ice cream that can't hurt. How do we change people's behavior when it comes to food?
Well, I think there's 2 issues. One is the structural environment in which people live. In Cleveland here, I met a young woman who was trying to make way in her life by becoming a chef, and we were talking in this local community college. And she said when she was little, she saw her uncles and aunts and this one, that one having amputations from diabetes. And her mother wanted to feed her kids a healthier diet. She had to take up 2 buses, an hour each way. So basically get on 4 different buses for 2 hours to buy some vegetables. So there are structural problems in our society of access, of cost. Vegetables and fruit have gone up 40% in the last 40 years, and soda's gone down by about the same amount. Those are structural issues that have to do with a toxic food environment and require a structural change on a policy level and on other methods. The other aspect of behavior change is really why Janice succeeded, right? Janice was part of a group, and we know that the way to change behavior is through friend power, not willpower. It's through accountability, it's through community, it's through support. Those are the ways in which science shows that we can actually make a difference. We just study published last week in Health Affairs showed that for every dollar you invest in community health workers, you make $2.47 in return on investment in reduced healthcare costs and better health outcomes. So, it's kind of a no-brainer. Except, I met the the CFO of Cleveland Clinic this morning. I just ran into him, and about 5 years ago, I said, Steve, we need to hire 10,000 community health workers at Cleveland Clinic, and he kind of joked and was like, yeah. And then I said, guess what? We're now in a value-based care model where people are going to be paid for outcomes. I said, maybe we need to go back to that. And I told him the study. He's like, wow, send that to me. So I think, it becomes an economic imperative, and it's really how we change behaviors through peers and support and community and a different delivery model for healthcare. That's what happened in the Daniel Plan with the church. We got 15,000 people to work together in small groups, just following a curriculum. There was no doctor or health coach or anything, and they lost 250,000 pounds in a year.
How does the FDA deal with food additives?
You're listening to Dr. Mark Hyman. He is founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center and head of strategy and innovation of the Cleveland Clinic for Functional Medicine. His previous books include Eat Fat, Get Thin and The Blood Sugar Solution. His most recent book is Food Fix, How to Save Our Health, Our Economy, Our Communities, and Our Planet, one bite at a time.
After the break, you'll get more advice on how we as individuals can make a difference.
Does better food have to be more expensive? You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
This People's Pharmacy podcast is brought to you in part by Verisana.com.
Verisana Lab offers home health tests that allow you to monitor your hormones and health conditions. You can take control of the quantitative assessment of your health and learn about male and female hormone balance, the stress hormone cortisol, leaky gut, gluten intolerance, or your gut microbiome.
Take a more active role in tracking your health and take 20% off your first order of a mail-in testing opportunity with the discount code PEOPLE. That's uppercase PEOPLE. To learn more, go to Verisana.com. That's Verisana.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Cocoa Via, offering plant-based nutrients in the form of cocoflavanols for brain and heart health. Online at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. Kaya Biotics.com.
Our topic today is food. What we eat has a huge impact on our health. How we grow it has a big impact on the health of the planet. How can we fix a broken food system?
Our guest is Dr. Mark Hyman, founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center. He's the head of strategy and innovation of the Cleveland Clinic for Functional Medicine and board president for clinical affairs for the Institute for Functional Medicine. His previous books include Food, What the Heck Should I Eat?, Eat Fat, Get Thin, and The Blood Sugar Solution. His most recent book is Food Fix, How to Save Our Health, Our Economy, Our Communities, and Our Planet, One Bite at a Time.
Dr. Hyman, I'm hoping that you'll be able to offer us some ways that we can, as individuals, make a difference on this big food problem. What are the food fixes that we can do in our own homes, in our own shopping carts, if you will?
Absolutely. And I do talk a lot about this in the book, and I think that what we do really matters, and the choice we make matter, not only for our health, but to drive the marketplace so that big companies change what they're doing. And we are seeing that effect. But the first thing you do is make sure that you try to work towards becoming a regenitarian as a dietary philosophy, which is try your best, and it won't always be possible, to eat foods that are grown in a regenerative way, whether it's regenerative beef, whether it's pasture-raised chickens, whether it's more organic and regenerative farms. You can do that by shopping at your local farmer's market, by joining a community-supported agriculture. You can have your own garden if you want. You can start your own compost pile. Even if you live in an apartment, there's in-apartment composters. You can give it to the farmer's markets in your town. You can start a compost pile in your backyard. And you can also, be active wherever you feel like you are inspired. For example, a friend of mine, saw in Boston City schools that the kids were eating such terrible food, and she took it on herself to go to the school and figure out a way within the school budget, within the school nutrition guidelines, to hire top chefs, refurbish the kitchens, and produce delicious, healthy food that the kids are doing better in school. Their behavior's better. They're healthier. And there's ways that actually this can be done at scale. So whether you focus on your schools, or maybe you decide you want to become a little bit politically active, and you go to your local municipality and say, let's start a compost ordinance, or it's mandatory composting like they have in San Francisco. So there's all sorts of ways to get involved and to be a voice. And of course, like I said, you can vote with your vote and be more politically active. You can support or donate groups that are advancing these ideas, like Kiss the Ground, which is a nonprofit that trains people how to do regenerative agriculture, Food Fix campaign. So there's all sorts of ways for people to get involved to actually feel like they're part of the solution. And I think when you vote with your wallet, when you stop buying the junk food, when you stop buying the processed food, when you start saying and demanding, I don't want these chemicals in my food, the industry changes.
Now, Dr. Hyman, you said something very important as you were describing your friend's intervention in the Boston Public Schools. You said, figured out a way to do it within the budget. And that's often a problem even at the family level. People say, well, I can't afford to shop at the farmer's market. You know, I can't afford to pay $6 for eggs that...
Sure.
$6 a dozen for eggs that have been laid by chickens that are farm raised and run around in pastures and eat bugs. And, the eggs may be better, but who can afford it, right?
Well, the truth is that the price we pay at the checkout counter is not the true cost of the food. If you took a regeneratively raised grass-fed beef that draws down climate, restores the ecosystem, conserves water, produce healthier food, the true cost of that should be a lot less than a feedlot burger that destroys the environment, uses tons of antibiotics, pesticides, chemicals, destroys the soil, makes poor quality meat. Maybe that should be $1,000, and the grass-fed steak should be $5.
but we're not seeing those hidden costs, are we?
We're not there yet. But the truth is, it's a hierarchy of choices, right? So you can choose to spend your dollars in ways that are economical, that don't cost a lot more or any more than eating processed food, and that provide a lot of health. And I've seen this happen. I mentioned maybe on a show before about this group that I work with in South Carolina. This family of 5 who lived in a trailer on food stamps and disability, seriously overweight, diabetic. The father was 42, on dialysis from kidney failure, from diabetes, and they were struggling, and they didn't know how to cook. They didn't know how to shop. They didn't know anything about nutrition. They were kind of confused by all the nutrition information. They thought Cool Whip was a healthy, low-fat, dressing, whatever, topping. And I showed them how to cook a simple meal from the guide called Good Food on a Tight Budget, which is from the Environmental Working Group on how to eat well for less. It's good for you, good for your wallet, and good for the planet. And they were able to do this. They lost 200 pounds as a family in the first year. They really were able to do it in one of the worst food deserts in America. And the son went on to lose 138 pounds and went to medical school. So I think, it's not about the ability. It's about the knowledge and the understanding of how to make the right choices. And again, you don't have to buy the $70 grass-fed T-bone steak. You could buy, something that's maybe without hormones or antibiotics. You can buy online now. There's ways you can go right to the farms and get, cut out the middleman and really have reduced cost food. Thrive Market does that, and there's other groups like Mariposa Ranch that has online sale of their beef that's regeneratively raised. You can get it's like $8 a pound on average, which is for a 4-ounce portion is less than a McDonald's hamburger. So you can actually do this. It just takes a little bit of work.
Dr. Mark Hyman, you have a chapter that is titled "The FDA is Not Doing Its Job to Protect Us." Shocking. I'm sure all of our listeners are just amazed to hear that. But you go on to suggest that, how come we have so many unpronounceable ingredients in our food? The mono and diglycerides, the carrageenan, the maltodextrin, the soy lecithins, the emulsifiers, and then you've got the preservatives. You've got
Now, those are really unpronounceable.
Yeah, well, you've got
like
the
butylated hydroxytoluene. You mean?
That's right. The BHA and the BHT are easy to pronounce, but not if you actually have to tell us what's in them. Or the brominated vegetable oils, the BVOs.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to pronounce this one. Azodicarbonamide, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Azodicarbonamide, yes.
Well, it comes trippingly to your tongue. But why does the FDA allow all of that stuff? Well, they say it's GRAS, generally recognized as safe, whatever that means. They even seem to think that glyphosate is generally recognized as safe. So why can't the FDA be more responsive to your recommendations?
Well, I once got the opportunity to speak to head of the FDA, and asked her why is this true? Why is this happening? Same question you just asked me. She says, and why can't we have clear food labels, and why are there antibiotics in our animal feed, and on and on. And she's like, well, the truth is that when we try to drive policy too hard, Congress threatens to shut off our funding. So it's a lot of it's political, and the food industry is the way the policy works here is that it's safe until proven otherwise. And the truth is we eat 3 to 5 pounds per person a year of food additives. most of which are not tested for safety. And the principle that we should be following, which is a precautionary principle, we don't. In other words, we'll take something off the market once it's proven to hurt you, and then not always that, right? So, for example, in Europe, many of the chemicals that we use here are banned. You mentioned azodicarbonamide. That's a softener for bread that's used in a lot of fast food products and so forth. And in Singapore, if you use it, you get a $450,000 fine and 15 years in jail.
Whoa.
Okay? And yet
so nobody uses it.
Well, no, but in this kind, butylated hydroxytoluene or another one, or BHT, is banned in Europe. BPA, bisphenol A is a plasticizer. It's in cans, so forth, but it's also in foods, and it's pretty harmful. It's a xenobiotic. It harms the endocrine system. It's been linked to insulin resistance and diabetes and cancer. And there was a bill to ban it. There was over 100 petitions from the food industry to actually prevent it from being banned, and they won. I was recently talking to someone who worked in the White House under the Obama administration around food policy. He said, it was interesting. All the people who were in industry would come in with briefing books that were 50 pages long, with policy recommendations, with regulatory changes, with legislative changes, all the science behind it and the rationale, and they'd have all their PowerPoints and bullet points. He said, not a single person came in to talk about the other side, because there is no lobby group for the good guys. And that's what we're trying to change.
I was going to say, how can we change that? One of the recommendations you make in Food Fix is that we separate business and policy. Is that possible?
Well, I don't know if we have to separate business and policy. What we need to do is separate the influence of the current lobby system. And it's going to be a very difficult thing to do because of our current policies and Citizens United, which is a Supreme Court decision that allowed unlimited contributions to super PACs, and corporations were seen as people, and it's a big problem. But I think we also have to have a little bit of faith in the self-interest of policymakers to understand that their constituents want this. That's why we need to build a grassroots movement, which I think hopefully all of you who are listening are going to be part of that. And second, we are really compelled to develop a parallel lobby advocacy group, which is what I'm working on with some really interesting people in Washington to be able to tell the different side of the story, to educate lawmakers, to develop strategic policies that can fit into our current regulatory and legislative environment and actually make a difference.
Well, you talk about your friend, and I don't know how to pronounce the last name, Vani Hari, Hari, and
yeah.
Vani has made a difference. Can you tell us about her, please?
Sure. So she's not a politician. She's not a scientist. She was a consultant for, Arthur Andersen before they changed her name to protect the guilty. And she basically was very sick as a young girl. Her parents were from India, and they wanted to give her the American experience. And so she ate processed food, junk food. She was overweight. She had acne. She had allergies. She had eczema. She had all kinds of health issues. And she finally woke up and said, well, maybe it's my food. She changed her diet and got super healthy. And then she began wondering, why all this stuff in the food? So she very strategically started going after these big companies, which is amazing. She called out, for example, the Subway, which had the yoga mat ingredient, or azodicarbonamide, and she kind of shamed them into getting rid of it. And then a lot of other big companies followed suit. She went to Kraft, for example, and said, why are you having all the chemicals in our Kraft macaroni and cheese here, but not in the same product in Europe? Because Europe, it's banned. And she said, and she sort of petitioned and shamed them into doing it. She got Chipotle and outed them for getting trans fats in their burrito things. And she was able to literally, by very smart social media and email and other kinds of online campaigns and petitions, to mobilize the consumers to make real change. And that's super exciting to see someone who's, really on the outside, but just has a very clear and loud voice and can mobilize an online army to actually make change. And that's what we can all do. I mean, everybody has the potential to do that.
That is very inspiring. We've got about 2 minutes left in our conversation today. And in those 2 minutes, I would like to invite you, Dr. Mark Hyman, to give us a pep talk with some bullet points on what we all can do.
Well, first of all, I think educate yourself. We all need to be aware of the problem. And that's, why I wrote my book, Food Fix, and why I think it's so important for people to understand that, one, we have a problem that food is causing and our food system is causing across all the different areas that we care about: health, the economy, kids' performance, social justice, climate, environment. And two, that we can do something about it, that we have the power. If this was caused by humans, it can be fixed by humans, and that we need to be changing our own lifestyle and our own choices and habits and purchases, as we've mentioned earlier in the show. And we need to, I think, become more politically engaged, whether it's in our local schools, in our local governments, whether it's at our business place of work. There's so much opportunity to get involved, and I think it's really important for us to not be apathetic. And people do feel overwhelmed and apathetic about climate change. And I think I did too, until I started realizing, wait a minute, we have a clear solution. Project Drawdown looked at the top 80 solutions in the world to draw down carbon and eliminate climate change or stop or reverse it. And the food system was the number one solution. So whether you start a compost pile or a little garden, or you get involved with your local government, like I said, to activate them to do different things, whether it's your workplaces, in Cleveland Clinic here, they eliminated all sugar-sweetened beverages from the entire campus. It's, 60,000 employees. Some weren't happy, but it's the right thing to do. And I think wherever you are, make a difference.
And let's not forget the small family farm. I grew up on a small dairy farm in Pennsylvania. My uncle had about 50 head of cattle, and he knew everyone's name. They loved him. He loved them. It was a very symbiotic relationship. Cow manure was very prized in our family, and so we would get a load of cow manure every spring for the garden, thanks to my uncle. There is a resurgence in family farms, but it's not easy. I'm hopeful that many of our listeners are shopping at their local farmers market and supporting their local farmers.
Well, that's part of the policy changes, supporting farmers to transition to regenerative ag, because it's better for the farmers, it's better for the land, it's better for all of us, and it's economically the right thing to do. It's morally the right thing to do, and it's environmentally the right thing to do. And I see this happening within Washington. There are efforts to move towards regenerative ag in the Farm Bill. So it's slow, but it is happening.
Dr. Mark Hyman, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Dr. Mark Hyman. He's the founder and director of the Ultra Wellness Center, the head of strategy and innovation of the Cleveland Clinic for Functional Medicine, and board president for clinical affairs for the Institute for Functional Medicine. His previous books include Food, What the Heck Should I Eat? Eat Fat, Get Thin, and The Blood Sugar Solution. His most recent book is Food Fix, How to Save Our Health, Our Economy, Our Communities, and Our Planet, one bite at a time.
And Terry, what were some of the practical solutions that Dr. Hyman has suggested?
Well, one practical solution is to buy regeneratively grown food whenever you can. That means shopping at your local farmer's market if there is one. He also suggested that we should be composting so that we reduce food waste.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verisana.com.
And by CocoVia, the maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. Information is available at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. KAYABiotics.com.
To buy a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1202. The number again, 800-732-2334, online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit the site, you can share your thoughts about today's show. What steps have you taken to help us fix our food system?
At peoplespharmacy.com, you can sign up for our free online newsletter or subscribe to the free podcast of the show. You'll never miss another episode, and you can share it with a friend. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.